A very warm welcome to this, the final session of UCD's Institute of Food and Health Research Day. And I'd particularly like to welcome our esteemed guests who've just joined us for this session. So in the session, we're going to bring together the thought leaders in the field. We have representatives from the senior management team of multinational food companies. We've got state regulators, our own university, and indeed an eminent economist and strategist. This session is designed to provide an opportunity to really explore the challenges that the agri-food sector is facing and hopefully propose some actions that we can take in order to provide solutions to these challenges. I'm really looking forward to the discussion here today. So without further ado, I'll pass over to my colleague Eileen Gibney, and she'll introduce the panelists and moderate the session. Over to you, Eileen.
Thanks, Dolores. Look, I'm delighted to be moderating this final session today to bring everybody together to share our views on the challenges we face in the agri-food and health area. So along with myself and Dolores, we have 5 panelists joining us this morning, and I want to introduce them all briefly now. We have Dr. Tom Arnold, who is currently chair of the committee developing Ireland's agri-food strategy to 2030. And Tom has served on a number of government and non-government bodies at national, European and international level, including the Irish Hunger Task Force, amongst others. In his earlier career, he was Chief Economist and Assistant Secretary General with the Irish Department of Agriculture and Food. Also joining us is Dr. Pamela Byrne, who is CEO at the Food Safety Authority of Ireland, and Pam has previously held senior positions in the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Marine, and was chair of the management board of the joint programming initiative, A Healthy Diet for Healthy Life, for last 5 years. And she is the chair of the strategic advisory board of the UCD Institute of Food and Health. Dr. Albert McQuaid is Chief Innovation Officer for Kerry's Global Taste and Nutrition business and is responsible for driving Kerry's innovation program. Albert joined Kerry as an R&D scientist in Dairyland Group and quickly progressed, holding several senior appointments, including CEO of Kerry EMEA and Chief Technology Officer for Kerry's Global Functional Ingredients and Active business before taking on his current role. Dr. Cliona Murphy is the Vice President of Quality and Assurance for PepsiCo and is the site leader for the Cork Research and Development Centre. And prior to this, she was Vice President for Research and Development, where she led the dairy and nutritious food research agenda for PepsiCo. And Professor Orla is Vice President for Research and Innovation and Impact and a Professor of Electronical Engineering with us here at UCD. So welcome to everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. So I'm going to jump straight in and ask you, Tom, if you don't mind, as chair of the National Agri-Food Strategy, can you share your thoughts with us on the main challenges that must be addressed by the agri-food sector, I suppose, now and in the next 5 to 10 years?
Thank you, Eileen, and I'm delighted to be part of this. Firstly, I think it's important to recognize that the exercise we're doing, which is to develop a strategy for up till 2030, is part of a longer series of such exercises. So this is about the 5th one since it's been in place since the year 2000. It involves essentially a stakeholder consultation with government involvement, and I think it's regarded as working well as a general process and one that many other countries look at with interest. So our particular exercise, and I'm very happy that Dolores is part of our 2030 committee, our particular exercise has been given terms of reference. And they are essentially to provide a vision for this agri-food sector up to 2030 with the overall objective of achieving sustainability for the sector in its 3 dimensions: economic, environmental, and social. And the more specific terms of reference, we were asked to look at what needed to happen to generate future food and beverages that meet consumer and societal expectations. I would stress there also the societal expectations. Secondly, to look at primary producer viability and welfare. And thirdly, look at climate smart, environmentally sustainable agri-food sector. Now, when we started our deliberations, we decided to add in a fourth, actually, which was to to examine the issue of innovation, technology, and the bioeconomy. So they are our official terms of reference, and we have to deliver on them. The other critical thing I think to note is that at our first meeting, first working meeting in January of this year, we decided to use what's called a food systems approach in developing our strategy. And to keep that as simple as possible, it is essentially to say that we're not just talking about the production of food, but we're talking about the links between food and health and food and climate, and how the agri-food sector has to meet requirements in all of these areas. So we started our work in January, and I mean, what has to be noted is that even though we were given terms of reference and general objectives for our exercise, the context in which we are developing it has actually considerably changed since we started our work, and will have to be taken account of as we develop our strategy. And this, I mean, the context, I mean, what are the key elements of that changing context? Well, firstly, there remains two big uncertainties. The issue of Brexit, the outcome of the negotiations, will have a critical impact on the environment into which, or the context in which, the agri-food sector develops. Hopefully that will be resolved to a significant degree over the next couple of months. The second obvious big issue is COVID. What impact is COVID going to have on consumer choice, on all manner of things, on supply chains, etc. And we are also going to have to take that into account. But the other big changes are that at EU level, there's been a very substantial shift towards a greater emphasis on the environment and the contribution that the agri-food sector has to make to achieving environmental goals. And the framing of that context is evolving, but is already, we're already aware of it. We have the European Green Deal, articulated by the European Commission, and more especially in the last week by the State of the Union message of the European Commission President, setting higher standards of environmental compliance that are required. As subsidiary documents to that, we've got the Farm to Fork policy document, which talks about reducing pesticides and fertilizer use and a range of other things. We also have the biodiversity strategy. So these are all significant EU policy measures which we will have to take account of and decide where Ireland fits and wishes to fit within those. The second area is I would say, and also the CAP reform, which is coming down the tracks a bit further on. The second big issue is more at global level. There is going to be increasing emphasis on food systems as a policy and political issue. That will be highlighted by the fact that next September in New York, there will be the UN Food Systems Summit. And Ireland is going to, again, have to make decisions about what role it wishes to play itself in developing in connecting with the set of issues raised by this. And here, and again, perhaps just in shorthand, I would point to the fact that tomorrow, the 29th of September, there will be the launch of a major foresight study by the Global Panel on Agriculture and Food Systems for Nutrition, of which I am a member. But this study is called Future Food Systems for People, Our Planet and Prosperity. And that substantial study, it's over about 200 pages long, starts with the contention that our current global food system is not fit for purpose and has to be significantly changed. And also comes up with a whole set of ideas about how that change should happen and what transition is going to be required for producers, for processors, for consumers, for government. And I would think that that is a framing of the problem that I think we as a panel will need, as a committee, 2030 committee, will have to take account of. So where are we in our work? We've had a number of meetings and we're in the process of drafting a report. There is a commitment in the programme for government that our report will be produced by the end of effectively by the end of the year. And that is what we are working towards. We have another couple of meetings to do that in, and I'm looking forward to getting this report finalised. And I hope providing a really relevant and progressive vision for the future of the sector up for the next decade. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tom, for some great insight. So could I ask you then, I suppose as a chair of the Food Safety Authority, we have, findings from the study Tom was relation to that our food systems is just not, fit for purpose, and the challenges. Are they the same challenges that you see as, as chair of the FSAI? And, what actions does Ireland need to take to future-proof our role in food systems, globally and then also nationally?
Thanks very much, Eileen, and also thanks to Dolores for the invitation and to participate in this panel. And I'm really delighted that Tom set out the context that he did, because it is within that context that a regulator such as the Food Safety Authority of Ireland has to operate and has to function. And of course, the primary focus of the Food Safety Authority is safe food, and food is not food if it isn't safe. And this is one of the key things that has to be remembered in the context of an evolving policy environment, evolving trade environment, and an evolving regulatory environment. That's our key focus. And indeed, therein lies risks and indeed threats, but also opportunities. The threats are no real different, really, I suppose, than they have been in the past in terms of biological threats, the usual suspects like Salmonella, E. coli, Campylobacter, Listeria. Obviously, there's new viruses emerging, and obviously we're in the middle of a global health pandemic. This was one of the concerns we would have had in the FSAI at the beginning of this, is that throughout the protection and all the measures that we were taking to protect public health within a COVID-19 environment, that we were making sure, and businesses were working really, really hard to make sure that the food that we're producing for people during that time and always is as safe as it can possibly be. Obviously, we have chemical threats that are changing and evolving all of the time. But particularly, I think what's really interesting is actually the global threat of climate change. And indeed, obviously, then the global issues around antimicrobial resistance. And these are key areas of focus, not just at a global level and at a European level, but also need to be, as Tom said, at a national level. So I'm delighted as a regulator within Ireland to hear about the great work that's going on within the Food 2030 committee. And I really look forward to reading the report, because and Tom makes the point around operating within a food systems context. And if you can think of the global food system within which Ireland operates, then as a regulator, we're not just responsible for protecting consumers of Irish food in Ireland. We believe we're responsible for protecting consumers of Irish food in 180 markets across the world. So we have a huge responsibility, far greater, I think, than one would expect for such a country of this size, of this population, but with a really, really innovative, really progressive, really ambitious food industry. And I think that speaks very much to, and is aligned very much to, the focus that the government and the stakeholders have put on this sector over the last number of years. And as Tom said, there's been a number of different programs and strategies over the years that have led us to this place where, in fact, the food industry is a key driver of our economic health, but equally a key driver of our social and societal health. And Tom talked about societal expectations. It's really important for us all to understand that consumers today have greater expectations than they've ever had before. And those expectations range from this absolute expectation and zero risk associated with their food. My food is safe. It has to be safe. I go into the supermarket, I purchase that food. It has to be safe. I go into a restaurant, I purchase that food, and it is safe. In Ireland, we expect that our food is safe. We don't tolerate any risk around that. So that's a huge responsibility. That's quite different to some of the other countries around the world. For example, we're working on a project in Albania. We're supporting the Albanian government to build up their capacity in food safety, veterinary and phytosanitary controls. I went to Albania at the start of this year. You're very careful about the restaurants that you walk into, because not every one of them has a good reputation. And in fact, we chose a restaurant specifically based on experience that people in Albania had, and it was a good experience. I mean, we were able to then go into that restaurant and feel like we were going to consume safe food. When we walk into a restaurant in Ireland, we don't have any expectation that there's any risk, any concerns. We go in, we purchase our food, we come home, we eat it, and that's it, and we're healthy. But that's not the same all over the world. And I think Tom talks about this global context, which is critically important. If we're contributing to the food supply of 180 countries all over the world, then we absolutely have to make sure that that food is safe. And important in that context as well is the safety, but also the authenticity of food. And you asked about what actions Ireland can take. I think part of what we're doing within the Food 2030 committee is really, really important. Connecting that to what's going on at a European level and indeed at an international level is critically important. Watching what's going on in our nearest neighbours in the context of Brexit is going to be really, really important. And understanding the environment within which they are going to regulate is going to be also very important for us as a regulator. So we've invested quite a lot of time and effort in understanding the systems and understanding the structures that are now emerging within the UK from a regulatory standpoint, and trying to preempt and trying to get an understanding of what might be the regulatory divergence that may happen in the future that could impact on consumers and safety of food here in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, but indeed equally, what might be those regulatory changes that may impact negatively on our industry to trade food, both into the single market and indeed into the UK and indeed into other global markets. I think that's where it's important for us to connect in as well to the European perspective, because that farm to fork strategy that Tom mentioned, in fact, has a key focus on sustainability and putting in place a sustainable regulatory framework for food labelling. I'm not too sure what that's going to look like. I'm really interested to see what's going to come up in the context of the discussions. But we absolutely need, as a country, to be able to plug into that conversation and make sure that what we're doing here is taken account of there. So that the regulatory framework that emerges from this particular activity is one that we're going to be able to plug into, but we're also one we're going to be able to influence. And I think that influence is critically important, and part of the role of the universities is around that influence, providing the science base, the evidence to inform the new tools, the new processes, the new standards, the new technologies, the new methodologies around risk assessment. And this is where UCD can play a huge role in the future in terms of plugging in to that research funding that's available at a national level, at a European level, and indeed if there's opportunities globally, then I think UCD should tap into those. And I know there's a lot of work going on internationally. And just to say, one of the key areas that's coming up at a European level in my discussions with my colleagues in the European.
Okay, we seem to have lost Pam just very briefly. You're back again there, Pam. Hi.
Hi, sorry about that. Technology isn't helping this morning. But just to say that one of the conversations that we're having at a European level is around the idea of regulatory science. And regulatory science is where we're starting to look at the knowledge we need, the tools we need, the approaches and new methodologies that we need in order to understand how we can assess risk. Because risk assessment is critically important to allow us as a regulator to make the right risk management decisions. And of course, communicate those risks to consumers. And just going right back to where Tom's talked about that consumer expectation, meeting those consumer expectations is going to be critically important. And the role that science plays in that is really important to us as an authority. We don't have the funds to invest in creating and developing our own science. We need the universities, and we need to plug into the best academics in the country and indeed more broadly across Europe and indeed across the world in order to make sure that the risk assessment decision, our risk assessments we're doing, inform the right risk management decisions, and we can protect consumers, which is ultimately the goal of the Food Safety Authority of Ireland. Thanks very much, Eileen.
Well, thank you, Pam. I mean, some real insights there, and I think Ireland plays a key role, as you say, in providing safe, and hopefully healthy, nutritious food amongst, other foods, to the global market. So it is important that we have the highest standards and maintain those highest standards. So I'm going to move to our representatives from industry. I think this is a nice segue to them to sort of ask, and I might start with you, Cliona, first. Pam describes the consumer expectation as being absolute, and as a consumer-facing global food company, what are the same priorities and challenges that you're seeing? I mean, 2020 has been a really unusual year: Brexit, COVID, economic challenges. What does that mean for a company like Pepsi, and what are the activities we should be doing to support the food industry and work with the food industry?
Yeah, thanks, Eileen. Yeah, 2020 has definitely been an unusual year, but I think I don't think we should let it kind of distract too much from what consumer expectation trends are. So obviously Pam has alluded to there, consumers, at least in the Western world, expect food to be safe. It's almost kind of table stakes. But actually for a company like ours with a global supply chain, global brands, food safety is table stakes for us, no matter where in the world we are operating or selling. I think some of the other trends we're seeing, obviously the trend towards kind of health is a continued one, an increasing requirement for personalized products, and a reduction in life cycle from a consumer point of view, as well as transparency. Consumers are increasingly expecting transparency. So all of those, I think, those consumer expectations have to be met. At the same time, you've obviously got sustainability demands, and both Tom and Pam alluded to that. Whether that's expecting producer like ours to reduce our greenhouse gases, reduce our water, operating an end-to-end supply chain means going literally from farm to fork. So understanding the agronomics of what we use as our raw materials. So particularly things like potatoes and corn, all the way to the packaging that we use and the sources of packaging. And on top of that, of course, you've got a demand for traceability, both from the regulator and consumer. So and again, operating a kind of a global supply chain, that leads to a number of challenges. And particularly, Pam talked about regulatory divergence, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges actually for a food company like ours. When you're operating across the world and your regulatory frameworks are not harmonized, your regulatory standards are not harmonized, makes it complex. And I'm sure Albert will get to this to make sure that what's reaching the consumers meets both the regulatory expectations as well as the consumer expectations. And Pam also alluded a little bit to chemical safety. I would say we've got a pretty good handle over the years on microbiological safety and how to manage production, notwithstanding the demand for less processing. So how do we, in the face of less processing, still maintain microbiological safety? But I would say for a company like ours, the increasing demands for chemical management, be it allergens, be it pesticides, again, across a global supply chain, in a regulatory framework that's quite divergent. Allergen standards are different in different parts of the world. Different allergens are regulated. That can be particularly challenging. So for a company like ours, then kind of managing that, what are we doing? I mean, a big effort on digitization and data management, because actually a lot of this, if you've got a divergent regulatory framework, a very complex ingredient portfolio, different processing lines, making different kinds of products, having the data at your fingertips as to kind of what's in the product, where is it coming from, how is it processed, where is it being sold, what's the consumer feedback, and linking all of that together. So a big journey on kind of data management and digitization to facilitate meeting consumer expectations as well as regulatory expectations, as well as our own kind of corporate expectations. If I think about what we need from universities like UCD and university researchers, I think we need a few things. The word food systems has been used a few times, and I think Tom did a very eloquent job of explaining some of the thinking around that. I think that's what we need from universities now, is systems thinking not just about a single function, but integrating the thinking from health into processing, into sustainability, and the impact of all of those things on the food system. I really liked Pam talking about regulatory science. I think increasingly, as the world becomes more complicated, as our data science becomes greater, our understanding actually of what's happening in food systems becomes greater, the need for regulatory science has never been greater. And I think it's an underserved area in most university systems. And I would actually encourage us to think about what UCD can do in that space. And I mentioned digitization. We're on our own digitization journey, but things like modeling and simulation in food systems, how can we, reduce the amount of things like shelf life testing, for example, we need to do it from a food safety point of view. We need to do it from a quality point of view, but can we reduce life cycle times by using modeling and simulation? Done very much in other industries where maybe the chemical modeling is easier. I actually worked in the chemical industry before joining PepsiCo. Harder in food systems, but I think with the computing power we have today, something that most universities who are interested in food should continue their focus. And lastly, of course, one of the big outputs from universities for companies like mine is talent. So yes, research is one output, but talent is another, and continuing to turn out digitally fluent, well-trained food scientists, engineers, environmental scientists is something that we look to UCD to do, not just now, but into the future. Thanks, Eileen.
Lovely, thank you very much. Lovely insights there. And Albert, can I move to you? And do we see the same challenges in Kerry? And I suppose, if we look to the future, where is, how can we support growth in in your industry and other food industries, here in Ireland and globally? I'll hand over to you.
Yes, Eileen, thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me to the panel this morning. Yeah, for Kerry, obviously our position in the food overall food supply chain is aligned to what Eileen talked about, Cliona talked about, in relation to we supply a lot of the major food and beverage companies globally. So the regulatory environment, we're having to understand and adapt to that, and specifically some of the specific challenges that individual customers may have based on how they're positioning their brand, their product into given markets, and some specific controls and that maybe even go beyond the regulators that they're now putting into place. So Kerry as a company is exposed to all of these challenges from a very practical point of view of the products we make and how they come to life in how we supply products to the industry. Our positioning is very much around the area of taste and nutrition. So over the last number of years, the company has evolved to focus on that demand that we're seeing from consumers and our customers. So consumers are looking for products that they want to be more sustainable, they want to be healthy, they want to be sure that are safe, that was already mentioned, but they want that in the context of products that they want to eat every day and they want to buy again tomorrow because they like the product. So we as a company are very much trying to solve those practical problems that consumers are bringing to our customers around how do we meet all of these challenges that the regulatory environment is telling us we must move forward to, but also how do we do it in a way that consumers will actually want to eat those products. So for us, the big opportunity for growth is how we embrace that. We see today we're a start. We started out as an Irish company, but we're very much a global company today. So we see a big part of our growth in developing markets. And particularly, you mentioned it, I think, Pam, around, you go to certain countries, the regulatory environment is very different, and the controls that are in place are not as good as you would expect in Western Europe or America. So how you develop the products for those markets, how you work and collaborate with the customers in those markets is different to how you need to work in the developed markets. But so we are looking at how we do so. In the area of food safety, we as a company have invested heavily into bringing to the marketplace new ingredients that are replacing some of the more chemical-based products that were used in the food industry in the past, where people want transparency, was mentioned, but they want to see food safety developed and delivered through more natural, more transparent, more recognizable ingredients. So one of our big axes of growth at the minute is around how we deliver food protection systems into the food industry that are more natural. So whether that's using fermentation technology, whether that's using smoke technology, whether that's using natural extracts, and using that in combinations. So it's not a one shoe fits all. It's multiple steps in that manufacturing supply chain that you have multiple hurdles that you're bringing to bear on the final food product. And as you do that, you're finding other challenges that come into play. You're finding functionality challenges that come into play. Other than the food preservation, you're finding taste challenges that come into play. And was mentioned here, food systems. Our focus has always been on food systems. We look at food as a holistic system approach, and the customer as someone that wants to solve a problem for the consumer, not just buy an ingredient from us. So we would always look at how we solve multiple problems in that food application. And that requires technology. So we as a company have developed over our years a very broad base of technology. We would have acquired in one dimension some of that technology, we would have developed it in another dimension. And what we find is differentiating for ourselves and how we work with our customers is how we bring that together, how we leverage multiple different technical capabilities to help solve the challenges that our customers are facing. And so as we look to the future, the other opportunity we would see for growth is around the two areas of sustainability and health. Very much sustainability, we see the move towards more sustainable food. So we're seeing a massive explosion today in everything plant-based, where, in the past, meat obviously is the mainstay consumption for a lot of people, but people now looking at how they move to alternatives to meat. And with that, there are many, many challenges. Consumers still want the product to taste somewhat similar to the meat products they'd have consumed before. However, when you're doing that with plant-based or other solutions, there are many functional challenges around texture, around taste, and there are many shelf life challenges, safety challenges, because a lot of these products will have formulations that are very different. And sometimes you can go towards delivering safety, but not delivering nutrition. So for example, we've seen in the advent of meat alternatives, very high salt products. And so the industry is looking for solutions that can deliver that new product that the consumer wants, but do it in a nutritious way and in a safe way. And we do work very extensively in that space. The other dimension around health is people are starting to look at food as an adjunct to how they keep themselves healthy. So through exercise, obviously through the medical support that they get in very specific circumstances, but looking at food and how it can influence your overall health and well-being and make you more adapted to the challenges that you may face. And obviously COVID is a very particular moment in time where people are very focused today on how COVID is affecting part of the population, maybe not affecting everyone. And people would love to understand how food could play a role, not a cure, but a role in helping people be well. And so we would love to do that. And that leads me to the point around how we collaborate with universities. We as a company are very much focused on the market and the customer. We work with companies like PepsiCo that Cliona represents here on helping solve the immediate problems that we have in front of us. We develop technologies to do so, and that technology is developed, within 6, 12, 14, 20, 24, maybe a couple of years. But the longer term research, we feel it's best to do that in collaboration with the research communities, where we can work in collaboration with them, and we can bring into the researchers the realities of the food industry, the realities of the supply chains that we have to work through, the realities of the regulatory environment that we have to operate within, and educate the university people in relation to how they should work and how they should develop the products that they need to develop, but also helping and giving them, I suppose, a space to explore. We as a company, obviously, we've got yearly and maybe 5-year objectives, and we can't maybe spend the investment ourselves on that more longer term platforms of what we need to develop. And I mentioned some of the areas that we're looking at, new taste capabilities that will help modulate the perception of food, and as we get to maybe plant-based products that have higher bitter components, less sweet, different texture components, and we need new components to come into the food supply chain that will help offset some of the challenges that they're bringing. New food safety components. We're looking constantly at trying to understand the core functionality that sits within an ingredient, and we don't understand that. And then maybe the last dimension is people are talking today about the microbiome and where food gets into your metabolism, and the microbiome is a really unknown space at this point in time, how it influences the overall health and well-being of an individual. And we don't understand the intricacies of those complex systems. And obviously there's a huge role to play for academia in helping us map that, understand it, and better develop new ways of influencing it to give overall health and well-being to consumers.
Okay, thanks, Albert. So lots of challenges there, I suppose, from the, the external panel members, risk assessment, authenticity, safety, consumer demands, sustainability, and very broadly. So I'd like to bring in Orla and Dolores now, and just quickly, Dolores, ask you, the Institute has, I suppose we've been outlined a very key role to play in some of the parts discussed here. Are we set to be able to support and enable some of these, to answer some of these challenges that have been posed here by the panel?
Thanks, Eileen. Certainly, I really enjoyed listening to the panelists, and thank you all very much for your contributions. I did have a sense of comfort that everything that the panelists were talking about has been raised within our strategy. I think we have always been fortunate at UCD that we have always taken a food systems approach because of the breadth of skills we have right across the food chain. It's wonderful that we have a farm that we can look at both crop science and the animal science. So we have always had that integrated approach, and I suppose that was the reason why the Institute came to being, was to connect those pieces together. And it's as if the opportunity has really arisen now in the external environment for us to play an even a bigger role than we've had in the past. So I think the direction of travel that we are setting is very much in line with the challenges that are being faced. Of course, in order to deliver and to support the demands there, or the requests of the panelists, does require people. From an Institute point of view, we have been very fortunate in that we really gained from the Ad Astra program, where UCD set out to find the best faculty right across disciplines and looking to recruit right across the world. And we were particularly good at attracting people in the food and health space. So in a lot of the areas that were spoken about there, in terms of the bioprocessing, in terms of the risk assessment, the plant science element of it, the taste modulation, we have been fortunate in that new faculty have joined us. But of course, these are big global challenges. So I think we will always be looking for more investment from a people point of view, from an infrastructure point of view. So I think the Institute is setting itself out on a good path. I mean, we've had a lot of consultation in developing this strategy. Indeed, many of the panel members have contributed to it already. I think our challenge will be to keep it relevant. So I hope that we will be able to draw on the panel members and indeed our other external users of our services to make sure that we stay flexible and stay relevant to the demands. I think where we would need to see further investment in things that jumped out at me is around that regulatory science piece. We have very few experts in that area, and I think to Cleona's point on whole chemical safety and toxicology, that has been, I think, lacking within Ireland for some time. What Albert is alluding to, I think, particularly the taste modulation, particularly as we try to move to more flexitarian diets and plant-based diets, that is a big challenge, and certainly further investment in this area would be very welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Dolores. And I suppose that leads on nicely really to Orla, within your role supporting research and innovation within the university. We feel we're rising to these challenges, but how does the national strategy, or how does the national environment support research in the universities, and this link to regulatory authorities, Europe and the industry around us?
Yeah, thanks, Eileen. First of all, thanks very much for the invitation to be here, and thanks to all the speakers. I thought it was fascinating, and there was a real commonality in what colleagues have been saying. It's such an interesting time. I mean, while attentions are so focused, obviously, on the pandemic, the big challenges, as people have alluded to, of sustainability, of Brexit, of digital transformation, of an aging population, antimicrobial resistance, all of these challenges are still there. And we need research. It makes it a challenging time, but also a time replete with opportunities for research and for research in Ireland. These are spaces that are very important to us nationally and where I think we can have a very, very significant role to play. So in terms of how the national system is responding, again, another disruptor at this time in the national system is the new government and if you look at the programme for government, there's an awful lot more coverage there of research, including right into the most fundamental research that has been there for quite some time. So I think that there is an opportunity. We have a new government department of further and higher education, research, innovation and science, a very ambitious department with an ambitious minister. There will be a new national strategy for research, innovation and science developed as the successor to Innovation 2020. So we need to make sure that the voice of the food industry is very much heard in that process, make sure that what emerges nationally will support the type of solutions that have been described here, solutions that are really amenable to research and to, I think, higher education-based research, because the integration across disciplines that really has come out in everything that the speakers have been saying. Food systems, as Dolores has said, is something that in UCD I think we've looked at for some time, but I'd never previously heard the term regulatory science, which I really like and will be taking away, because of course, just to take that as one example, it speaks to so much of what we do in a broad-based university like UCD. We would have in our law school, we would have great expertise in regulation, in our social sciences, including the behavioral science, which is so important to this area. Within mathematics, obviously a huge amount of work around risk and into computer science. So just to take that one example, we can contribute in so many different ways, working in partnership with industry and with regulators. And I loved what Albert said about, you know, the fact that ourselves in industry, we have complementary roles. This is a real partnership in the sense that we're not trying to duplicate what one another is doing, but we are trying to influence and inform what one another is doing and learn together from the continuum that emerges. So it's a really exciting time, I think, for research in Ireland, a really exciting time for research in UCD. I'm delighted with the approach of the Institute for Food and Health, and thank you so much to all who are involved in that, both driving it internally and those contributing externally. And I think that we can do great things here at a really disruptive moment.
Great, thank you, Orla, for that. We do have time, just a couple of minutes, if anyone has any comments that they'd like to pass from what the other panelists have said. You know, are there any questions you'd like to ask each other? I mean, there's, you know, a lot of key topics that have been mentioned. That, you know, as Orla said, there is a lot of commonality across it. And I think that that's a really key thing, that, you know, our strategies do appear, you know, from the university, from, you know, AgriFood 2030, from all of the European strategies and the regulators, there is a commonality. And, you know, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Should we be challenging this, or what do people think? Tom, you haven't spoken for a while.
Well, I mean, as a general principle, I accept the view that it's not good that everybody thinks along the same lines. I think we all know the cost of that. At the same time, I think there is a strength in this fact that there's been a big shift in the last, I would say, 5 to 8 years of the need to look at take a food systems approach to things. And the absolute need to acknowledge that there is a connection between food systems and health and climate. But within that general proposition, there's a challenge to identify the really critical areas. I mean, if we are to pose the question here in Ireland, where does current policy reflect a connection between food systems and health? What are the institutional connections between the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health? I think the answer is thin. And I think one of the challenges, and this will be very much, I think, on the plate with Dolores when we get to focusing on, if you like, the final, I would say, one of the final chapters in our report, which is on this question of meeting consumer and societal needs. Can we identify a really practical policy agenda linking aspects of linking food systems and aspects of the health agenda? Because we can't link everything. We have to make choices. And I think getting to that, that for me in the next 2 months is going to be one of the critical things that we're going to have to do in the work on the 2030 committee.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to come in very briefly?
Just to pick up on that, Eileen, I think really what Tom has articulated there is a challenge really that I was almost nervous of being able to tackle, that you could take the environment piece and working that in synergy with the nutrition and health piece. And I did think that there would have to be a lot of compromises along the way. But the past couple of weeks, one of our researchers, Dr. Africa Sullivan, presented a public lecture in the area of sustainable diets. And I think a message that was very clear from it, that if everybody made an effort to abide by the dietary guidelines, that would be a very good starting point in terms of addressing the environmental issues. So I think it's a very, I can't say small, because changing consumer behavior and getting to eat according to the dietary guidelines is always a challenge. But I think it is an example of practical steps that can be taken to get that connection between the various departments of environmental, of ag, of health. So I think it was an evidence-based message, but a very strong message that we can make a difference with taking a relatively small change to our current behaviour.
Okay, thank you. In the interest
Eileen,
of time,
sorry. Just very quickly, Eileen, I'd just like to support what Dolores has said, and particularly Tom, in that idea, and I suppose request and plea for more policy coherence on this, because the policy challenges, the problems that we're facing require a very different policy response than the responses that we've been giving and providing in the past. Equally, even in the development of that policy, the role that universities can play in providing the evidence to inform that policy is critically important, as well as all of the other organisations and indeed other stakeholders, as well as providing that evidence in to that policy development. Of course, then the implementation of that policy is critically important, and how it's done and who does it is critical to the success of achieving the policy outcomes. But equally as important, I think this was a point made by the scientific advisory mechanism to the European Union, was around an iterative and a responsive and adaptive policy approach to how we do things. So not setting out the policy and sticking to it for an extensive length of time without monitoring and evaluating whether or not it's achieving what it is set out to do, and then having the courage really to iterate around that. And I think Ireland has, demonstrated that we do have the ability to respond to very complex problems. We have demonstrated this for many, many years, hundreds of years. We've responded to really, really significant challenges, both societally, politically, and in other ways. And we do have the ability to work together. And while we may not all want to be, we all need to be aligned, or at least facing in the same direction. We don't necessarily always have to agree in how we get there. And I think that is the diversity, and bringing that diversity into the conversation is going to be really important. But that coherent policy piece is critical for the future, because then it sets the context within which all of the different actors can then begin the process of determining what they are going to deliver into making that policy a success.
Lovely. Thank you, Pam. I think that really summarises a lot. So I'd like to just thank all the panelists, for attending and giving us their significant insight. And I think it's given us, an awful lot to think about, and makes me excited to sort of raise to the challenges that we have over the next while. If I could just hand over finally to Professor Orla Feely, just to say thank you to everybody and to close the session today. Thank you very much, Orla.
Thanks, Eileen, and thanks everybody. I thought it was a really interesting and stimulating session. It's such a shame we can't be sitting around a table as we would be under normal circumstances and chatting afterwards, but I think we've all adapted to this new reality. For us in UCD, food and health, as you know, has been a huge priority for us for a very long time, and its importance is only growing. If you look at what we need in UCD in order to really mobilise within an area, we need leadership. And I wanted to really single out the leadership of Dolores, and you see Eileen here today. We've got great leaders in this area within UCD. We need partners. We need partners, academic partners, nationally, internationally. We need industry partners, partners from within the regulatory and other systems. Again, we've got those in spades in this sector. And we need a global challenge where we can deliver real solutions. So we want to have excellent work that can really deliver on a global stage. And again, we've got that happening as well in UCD. So it's an area that is so important to us, and our external partnerships are so important within that. So thank you all for what you do. We want to continue delivering for food, for health within UCD, and we look forward to what we can achieve together at this really, really interesting moment for the sector. Thanks again.
Lovely. Thank you,
Thank
Orla.
you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.